Okay, so the second book that I want to show you as part of this spotlight session on the Civil War is another book that's almost a contemporary history of the Civil War. This book is The Wars in England, Scotland and Ireland, or an impartial account of all the battles, sieges and other remarkable transactions, revolutions, which happened from the beginning of the reign of King Charles I in 1625 to the restoration of King Charles II in 1660 by Richard Burton. Now, Richard Burton, it turns out, was a pseudonym of a chap named Nathaniel Crouch. And he published under various pseudonyms, Richard Burton, Robert Burton, or just the initials RB. But it's fairly well established that these were actually all pseudonyms of Nathaniel Crouch. So, Nathaniel Crouch was born around about 1632. He lived until around about 1725. And he was the son of a tailor from Lewes. But he became a freeman of the Stationers' Company later in his life, and he is mostly remembered for publishing a series of small books which cost 1 shilling each. So these are books that were quite easily accessible to most people. And what they were was generally kind of overviews or summaries. They presented simplified versions of important works that had been published at the time. So works on history or nature or travel, and they were incredibly popular. They were known as Burton's books, and they're even mentioned in some of the letters of Dr. Johnson was asking to get hold of copies of Burton's books. Now, as I say, they were a small size book, and this is obviously a larger size of book, and you can see from the frontispiece, from the title page, that this book has the date of 1810 on it. Now, we know that this particular book, Burton's Wars in England, Scotland and Ireland, was originally published in 1681. However, in researching this and looking on through the Dictionary of National Biography, I discovered that a collected edition of his historical works was issued in 1810 to 1814, chiefly intended for collectors who illustrate books by the insertion of additional engravings. And I'm fairly certain that that's what this must be. I think that it's a reprint of the original 17th century book, and that the original pages would have been this small size, but this has been reprinted in a larger size in order that additional plates can be added in. And there are many additional plates throughout it. So the frontispiece is this rather nice engraving of a portrait of Charles I. And as you go through, you often find that where a person's portrait has been included in the text, there's a facing page which now has that portrait again with a bit of a biography about the person being talked about. And these are always of this slightly larger size. So I think these are the plates that had been added in to the original text. So this would have been published, as I say, originally in 1681. So sort of 20 odd years after the Restoration, so 30 or 40 years after the events that it's recounting, and it was intended, as it says in the preface, intended for the use of those who cannot go to the price of a greater volume, and yet would willingly be informed of these wondrous transactions and revolutions which have happened. So it specifically says in the preface that this was intended to be an easily accessible, cheap version of the sorts of information that were being published and that were around at the time. Now, it has been noted that because Nathaniel Crouch, under the name of Burton, because he was not himself a historian, he was basically just condensing information that was out there elsewhere. There are a number of inaccuracies in the works that he produced, but they were very important as pieces of, as books basically, because they were accessible, because they were something that more people could get hold of than could otherwise. And that in itself is shown by the fact that in the early 19th century, they were reprinted in order that more people could access them and could add their own extra illustrations to them. So this seems to be the only one of Burton's books that we've got in the collection, but it is a rather nice one to have a look through. And it's stored up here in the Victor Semmons room and is available on the open shelves for people to come and read or to borrow. So there we go.